Why, hello. Welcome.
Hello, Brother Hancock. Okay, so today is about the voices of World War I, and we want to establish first, going into the war, that Rupert Brooke's poem is more about the glory of England and the glory of fighting. And that's what people thought when they first started World War I. And it talks about how in some corner of a foreign field, that is forever England, and how being a soldier is the way that they could best serve England as an Englishman, is to go into war. And that underneath, like, this English heaven or fighting in a war, that it would be their way to get into heaven. That's what I think. And so Rupert Brooke, in beginning the war, it just kind of portrayed a glorified image of what a soldier really means. And as the war keeps going and more deaths occur and things start getting complicated, the rest of the poets see the reality of what death and what war really means. And that's what the rest of the poems kind of talk about.
So, in your response to your question, what makes World War II different from other wars? A lot of wars in the past thought about, like, glory and how you go and, you fought with swords, and whoever was talented and, superior, who had a lot of practice, usually won. This, however, was different because people died in trenches, and it was mass killings instead of, oh, I'm better than you killings. It was more of luck. And so people, didn't matter who they were, could die. And so more people were scared of dying, and more people faced the thought that they will die. Like, for example, Edward Thomas, I feel like he talked a lot about that, and how he talked in Rain, but also Sigurd Sassoon talked about how how people died, and it's funny because people wanted to go there for the glory, and especially in the poem it's like talking about God and how people went out there for the glory of God, and then afterwards are like, really, did God want us to just go die?
Another aspect that made it different, I think, is the fact that it was like the first major war, and people just kind of didn't take it as serious because they didn't really have experience with such a mass war, like it was a world war, so they just kind of they were like ignorant, they didn't really understand, especially the people at home, like the women and stuff. I like on page 2025, The Glory of Women, it says, "Oh, German mother, dreaming by the fire while you're knitting socks to send your son, his face is trodden deeper in the mud." So it just kind of really gives you a good visual of, like, how people at home just were having this kind of a more positive outlook on it, like, oh, they'll make it home, we need to send them socks and stuff to keep them warm, but really the atrocities, I can never say that word right, atrocities of war were, like, surreal, and they weren't just, like, sitting in a trench waiting for some socks. They were, like, dead or bloody, or however graphic you want to get with that. But also I liked on page 2037, Dulce et decorum est, which means it is sweet and meet to die for one's country, sweet and decorous. So I think, like, the title is very like, what's it, like, ironic, because it's like making it sound, oh, it's so sweet, but really then when you start reading it, it's like all these really graphic, horrible things, like, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud. Just, like, really descriptive stuff like that of a war scene. You get, like, this is not positive, like, this is a horrible thing. And so Yeah, that's my piece. I feel like I've talked so much. Does anyone have something?
Well, there's just so much more to add about this war scene that I really like.
Yeah.
I was just like, especially Wilfred Owen was very, very, talking about the war scene in the moment, how people were going to die. Like, one of my favorite parts, I've already told them that how the Norny voice of mourning saved the choirs, the shrill demented choirs of wailing shells. Like, that's a very good imagery of how, like, the only people who are there for them are their enemies trying to kill them. And
choirs of angels that are singing their glory.
Yeah, it's the choirs of gun shells.
Yeah.
especially in his poem about disabled, it talks about after the war and how he suddenly comes to grips that this kind of thing isn't actually glorious, because here he sits in a wheelchair, he has no legs, everybody looks at him and is like, hi, 2039, like, hey, hi. And he expects, they say here, he hears what was, voices of boys ran saddening like a hymn, voices of play and pleasure after day. And so it just talks about, like, what he wanted and how he felt before the war, and how he, in old times, he was with girls, he remembered how he held them, the warmth of their hands, and he just wishes for those times. And now, because of the war, he has so many problems. He is in a wheelchair, and he's alone. He has no legs.
It talks about how the women also just glaze over him now, because he's not, a glorious soldier.
Yeah.
In their mind.
He is, like, a glorious soldier because he went and fought
survived.
and he survived.
But because he's disabled, they're, like, pitying him.
Yeah, and he's
looking at the strong men.
Mm-hmm.
Especially strong men who didn't even go to the war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Like, those complete men, and so he's like, why did I go?
And then I think also the disabled poem kind of highlights how I feel like battles before that, you never really heard about what the aftermath of the war, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that there were a lot of repercussions, but you didn't really, they weren't as big of an effect as the ones that they had after the First World War, which sets it apart also because all of the disabled and the sick and the huge amount of soldiers that died there was detrimental to the amount of men they had within the British kingdom.
It said in the introduction that it
wiped out families.
It wiped out an entire generation of young men.
There we go. And so I feel like that's the first time that people really see so much death all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Just this massive nothing, because really they didn't really win anything, because many people died.
They went to war, but they lost more than they put in.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Especially because the generation after, or was it after World War I too, that there was a silent generation? I think it was after World War II.
That's two.
Okay. But still, they were, like, shocked.
Mm-hmm.
And because wars before never were like this,
Mm-hmm.
The Boer War,
it was a battle and, like, that's it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a continuing, like,
24/7.
Yeah.
in trenches. Yeah, depressing.
I remember watching have you guys seen The Little Princess, the movie?
No.
It's really old.
Remember, I think I watched it, but I do not remember it.
So a colonel, it kind of talks about this period of, he's in India, and then, because that's where the English conquered, and he was like an admiral there, and he was pretty high up, and he had a daughter and a wife and everything. The wife dies, they move to England, and the World War I starts, and so it shows how he had to leave, and so his daughter was put in, like, a orphan home, a girl's home, and then...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm remembering.
And then when he comes back from the war, he doesn't even remember his daughter. And so she has to stay in that girl's home. But it ends happily, but in real life, I'm sure more often than that happened, that they were dead, or they just didn't even remember who they were or care for the life that they previously had.
I know, it's just, like, so heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel it in the poems when you read them. Like, they're depressing, and they're sad, and they clearly have an imagery that was like rich imagery, and you can almost feel like you're there. I've like never been in that kind of war, but I can feel like I've been in the trench with them, feeling depressed and being like disillusioned with life.
Mm-hmm. And when it talks about when the water coming in and that they're sitting in this with rats everywhere, like you can like see it and you can feel it as if you're there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
With people knitting socks for me that I will never see.
Yeah.
And, you know, if I should die, think of it's only a baby.
Mm-hmm.
I would want this little section of Earth to be America because I'm not England.
It kind of reminds me of in the end of Heart of Darkness, how
The horror.
yeah,
And
and
only
then
Conrad lived during World War One. Did he?
I don't know.
No.
I don't know, but it just kind of has the same ending where the women are still disillusioned when they hear that her husband has died, you know, and so they continue in that disillusion, and then these.
Wait, was that in here?
No, it was Heart of Darkness.
No, I'm just saying, like,
Oh.
it reminds me of Heart of Darkness
Okay.
when it talks about that. It's the same situation of being disillusioned with life.
Because the women, like, when the men come back, they still, if their men didn't come back, they're like, no, he thought of me till the very end. When
Yeah.
he's probably thinking, I'm really
Why am I
cold.
here?
Why is a rat eating my shirt?
When I'm not even dead. Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
So just to summarize all that up with something that Malia said right here, glorified ideals of war caused a lot to recruit without age or anything.
Oh, without any like parameters of
Yeah,
who they're recruiting.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
another
Or was
reason.
that in Glory of Women?
That was in Disabled.
Disabled.
But there's also Glory of Women, where it talks about this disillusionment of the women, of how, like, oh, you love us when we're heroes, how like, you worship decorations, you make us shells.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you worship the outside of us, but you don't understand what went on the inside.
It's also talking about how they physically made the shells for them to shoot to kill other people
It's true,
in
but
the factories and stuff too.
double meaning.
Yes,
And
true.
also, like,
I wonder if, like, somebody had leaked out, like, the actual atrocities of war to, you know, people back home, like, with pictures or, like...
I think the poets did.
Well, was it during the war, though?
Mm-hmm. Well, that these were printed.
Yeah,
Like
like...
people saw them.
Yeah.
Mm,
Because I feel like if these were printed,
1920.
nobody would have signed up for war, or nobody would have seen it as such a glorious thing, you know?
When was World War I exactly?
1914.
1914. That's right. Well, this was published in 1920, so when did the war officially end?
1917 or something.
So these were after.
Yeah, after.
So, because that it also has, they wrote these while they were out there in war, and then they died, and someone had to find them and to, you know,
I feel
publish
like
them.
Willard Owen was writing it when he was injured and he left the war,
Oh yeah,
and then he wrote some poems, and then he went back,
that's true.
and then
he
came
died.
back because he was injured again. He never died from the war.
He did it?
I wonder if he was like the Red
I
Badge of
thought he did.
Courage dude, where he like
Oh, yeah, he
in
was
the war, but like, injured himself to go home and write the poem.
Well, Owen was killed in
I
action
hope
a week
not.
before the war ended, so
Yeah,
he was killed in the war.
in action. I knew it,
But
but
he-
he still went back.
So that means he wrote all these when he's in the war? Wait, I need to check when this war ended.
So how's Disneyland?
I can't remember.
Which one's your favorite ride so far? Oh, or
But
your kid's favorite ride?
We
That's the
haven't
better
talked
question.
about in parentheses
Winnie the
yet.
Pooh.
Winnie the
Dude, I
Pooh.
love Winnie the Pooh, no matter my age. Or Alice in Wonderland.
Alice in Wonderland is a pretty good one.
Yeah.
I've always loved the
Toad's
Log.
Wild Ride. That's pretty good.
Oh, I always hit that one when I go. I think,
I think they changed it though. It might be like Elsa and Anna or something.
no, it's still Mr. Tubby's.
Because didn't they add some kind of Frozen theme and...
They did, but it's more of a cottage. And they have like
Oh,
the little girls can go in there and dress like Anna and
Okay.
makeup, and then they meet the real princess. So, yeah.
The real one?
Yes.
Like from the movie?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I have to go.
Okay, that's 15 minutes. That's the 15 minutes.
It's
Oh,
okay.
I did read this one from in parentheses. Yeah, I did.
But in parentheses is about really good things. About the beginning and the end of the war. It's like in parentheses, he he he. You see that? You see that? And so it just talks about a platoon and how like they go in there and they're all really, excited, but they come back and they're clumsy. It says you're clumsy with feebleness. You implicate your tin hat rim with the slapsing of it, and it just talks about like the difference between two. Yeah.
Well,
This was a pleasure talking to you.
twas,
Enjoy.
but we must go.
Say hi to Peter Pan. He's my favorite.
Bye.